Hello, everybody. Welcome to Storytellers Row. I'm your host, David Lanier, and I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games since this edition, starting in 1977 for me. This game edition, came out in 1974 and was designed by predominantly two gentlemen, Gary Gygax and David Arnes. They adapted a war game into a fantasy role-playing game, a fantasy storytelling role-playing game. And over the decades that it has existed, it has evolved. It has evolved primarily because players such as myself, who feel that it's mostly a storytelling game, right? We're looking for more bits and things to put in there and make it more adaptable and realistic. And some players always screamed and insisted that there be some consistent form of a mechanic to explain everything. And you had to have specific, die rolls and stats and all of that. And as we storytellers evolved from that, we started playing other things such as Call of Cthulhu and Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse. And we basically got into games that told more of a story and were more story focused. Dungeons and Dragons evolved eventually, was bought out by a company called Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast sort of shaped it more back into a storytelling game. Some elements that they have in their current version work for that, and some have to be sort of modified by a game master depending on the kind of world setting you're putting it in. That is, when you adapt the rules and create your own world for your players to play about in, but we're not going to start there. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the concept of Dungeons and Dragons as a storytelling role-playing game, role as in ROLE, and we're going to take a look at it from the standpoint of the present holders of the intellectual property of it. I'm then going to explain a storyteller's approach to designing a world or adapting a story that we're all probably very familiar with, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, one with Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia. And we're going to understand how that works, and we're going to go in increments. But today, first, I want to discuss what story elements we're going to be using and structures we're going to be using, and how we outline our adventure ahead of time. By outlining our adventure ahead of time as a game master or a storyteller or a narrator, however you want to define that, your job will be infinitely easier. You'll find that having to know all the rules or memorize all the rules or remember where to look something up or when to look something up or where something is won't be as difficult for you anymore. You'll have an intuitive understanding of the narrative such that when players go off the beaten path of the story, right? And that's what they do. That's exactly what they do. And they're supposed to do that. And we expect that. Instead of having to figure out every potential, plot, hook, twist, turn, right? Point, like a web, a spider's web, you go nuts. Don't do that. Don't do that. We're not playing a game of chess. It's not DM versus player, right? It's a co-created storytelling role-playing game. As the dungeon master, you are the primary player because you are building the world. You control the world. You decide what monsters, creatures, pantheons, and things are in the world, what magic items are in the world, what magic items and other things aren't in the world, the level of magic, all of that stuff is your purview. And it's explained in this book called The Dungeon Master's Guide. This is the 5th edition of that book, but it's one of the basic books you have to have in order to be able to play the game. You need 3 core books: Player's Handbook, also known as the PHB, Dungeon Master's Guide, otherwise known as the DMG, and the Monster Manual, also known as the MM. So let's, before we start discussing a story or the game itself or anything else, let's see what they, the makers, the designers, the creators presently of this incarnation of the game, 5th edition, say about the game. This is a direct quote from page 5 of the Player's Handbook Introduction. And it says, "The Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game," that's ROLE, by the way, "is about storytelling in worlds of swords and sorcery. It shares elements with childhood games of make-believe. Like those games, D&D is driven by imagination. It's about picturing the towering castle beneath the stormy night sky and imagining how a fantasy adventurer might react to the challenges that scene presents." So basically, the Dungeon Master will describe the scene in which all the players are in front of, right? Let's take that stormy night in the castle, right? It's raining, you've been trekking about for weeks, you're low on food, and you're grateful for the rain because you've been dying of thirst for the past couple of days, and you're just kind of grateful for it for a moment. It washes off the mud and muck for you, but you're getting drenched. It is a downpour. And in the distance, you see a castle. As an adventurer, in the role of an adventurer, you might be, say, a soldier, some sort of fighter. And you might see the sigil on the castle banner, and you might recognize it. And you might recognize that that is a sigil of an order of knights you are familiar with. And that baron is friendly to your people, and as a result, you might be able to get some aid and succor. Your wizard might have some similar background from his arcane studies and knowledge and whatever, and recognize something, who knows? But there's all sorts of bits you can fit in there and keep your players enticed. Because Dungeons & Dragons originally adapted from a war game into a role-playing game, the original incarnation of it, the 1st edition, that is this edition, looked at the hero's journey as a separation of specific classes with specific tasks or abilities. So you might have a fighter, you might have a rogue, you might have the wizard, their arcane spellcaster, you might have a cleric, the healer, right? And they might all go together. And at various times within an adventure, right, because of their unique abilities, they would become the face of the party at that moment. And their skill set was necessary. And it was sort of engineered that way so that everybody could have their moment on stage. However, it required you to have an injury or something if you're going to use it specifically as the cleric is the healer of the party. If the fighter is, the tank, you're going to have him go run out into the fray and keep everybody safe while, other people stay back here and do all their things from ranges. And it creates still a very war game approach to role play. And it's a role-playing storytelling game. We're telling a story that we all get involved in. The dice, which we will discuss in another episode, imitate a sense of chance in a story and as a result of being the improvisational chance. Did I succeed? Did I fail? Do I notice somebody coming up from behind me? Can I respond to it before they do whatever it is they're going to do? That kind of thing. Knowing when to use those die rolls and when not to, and how to keep the story going, that's what we're going to look at. So our first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this as a master's level course. Sorry about that, but I have 6 games I run. I use Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games and improvisational tools of storytelling in a specified and scaffolded format by which to teach individuals with mental health challenges how to express themselves and how to use storytelling and the skills of storytelling, right, to engage a system that we call neuroplasticity in order for them to create new neural connections and pathways in their minds by which they can overcome some of their challenges and maybe be better enabled to recognize certain verbal and nonverbal cues, start and continue conversations, strengthen their imaginations, build and help establish their self-esteem and sense of self-expression. Also play with people who are, well, non-neurodivergent, I guess is the new term. And I found that the tools that I use for both groups work quite well. I'm going to show you some of them so that you can design better games and better stories for your own adventures at your own tables. But we're going to do it pretty quickly. So this is our basic superstructure of a story. This is kind of confusing at the moment for all of us, so let's break it down a little bit. In the Western tradition, Aristotelian tradition of storytelling, we have 2 lines which form the basic form of any story. Okay? They form the systolic and dystolic pressure with which our story is going to move along its path towards its resolution or conclusion, its climax. Some people break this structure up into various beats depending on how you're looking at it, whether you're looking at it from a character's perspective and the story perspective of the character and the hero's journey, or whether or not you're looking at it from just a generic story point, or what have you. We're just looking at the superstructure of a story itself. We are not looking at any of the actual characters or players' needs or backstories or anything of that moment yet. This is going to give us our basic structure for the outline so we know where certain things and moments in our story will make the best sense to place there. And it will help us to understand the rules of a story much better. It will also give us a good outline so that we understand when our players go off and do their things, right? What encounters might encourage them to get back engaged into the main plot or storyline or whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. Or maybe they create some other plot line that you hadn't really thought of, but it's really kind of cool and you want to go and look and explore that a little bit. So maybe you explore that with them for a minute before you bring them back in. See? And this is how you do that. This is how you know when it's appropriate. All of that. So we have the 2 lines, hope and fear. The ancient Greeks called those comedy and tragedy. And the story was our hero's journey in between those 2 lines of hope and fear, or comedy and tragedy. If we were telling a comedy, our protagonist, right, would start way down here in the muck and all sorts of crappy things would happen to him. And it wouldn't be really fair that they happened to him. And there's some sort of thing that we can identify with him. You know, maybe he's somebody who needs a little bit of encouragement and help. You know, maybe we see ourselves in that hero some way, but in some way we identify with his need to have some sort of break in his life. And through the journey that he takes, he's going to have many obstacles in which he sort of grows as a person and an individual, and challenges external and internal to him maybe. And as a result, when he succeeds finally at the end in getting the girl or getting the car or getting whatever it is that is his greatest reward or dream or hope, we have a cathartic moment and we actually want him to succeed. We actually feel, right, happy that they succeeded. And that is the actual traditional story expression and definition of a comedy. Not ha-ha like I'm reading a comic strip or watching a stand-up comic in a theater. Tragedy is much like Oedipus, right? He starts up here, everything's great, he's got a great job, he's king, you know, and he's married to a great woman who supports him. I mean, yeah, okay, she's a little bit older, that's a bit weird, but hey, you know, she's kind of good looking, and she's got his back, so to speak. And then over the course of his journey, he later discovers that he's married to his mother, and then he gouges out his own eyes. And that is tragic, unless you're a sociopath. We don't have murder hobos in our games. We kick them out. But that's a term we'll get into later. So our hero is going to go on this roller coaster ride of hope and fear cycles, in which we as an audience will be riding along with them. Maybe in a novel, that's only one layer of abstraction, right? So in a novel, you only have one reader to engage in that experience, and it's a lot easier. They help create that experience for you because they're the ones interpreting the words you wrote. In a movie or a play, you have two layers of abstraction, right? Because everybody in the audience is going to see the exact same dialogue, the exact same scenes, the exact same story, and everything else. And it has to be conveyed in the same way. And every time they come, they're going to see the exact same thing, right? But we know what they're going to see. We know what they're going to picture. We're going to paint it for them. And it's a much broader audience. But for a role-playing, storytelling game, we have three layers of abstraction because we don't know what the players are going to do, and they are a very important part of it. So we outline it with a roller coaster, and we have a superstructure, which we will call the 7-point plot structure. 7-point plot structure are the lines that break up the moments, right, of our hope and fear cycles, comedy and tragedy cycles, that we're going to warrant in our story to get the people involved. The engine for which our story works and drives it is what we call in, screenwriting and whatever parlance, the log line. Log line is really kind of boring. It's a very short synopsis of everything that will tell us what's going on. So the log line, for example, for Star Wars might be farm boy discovers a princess is in distress, and it launches him into discovering things about himself, that he has this mystic power, the force within him, and it launches him into outer space to save the princess. From the rebellion or from the empire. Doesn't sound very exciting, does it? The movie was fantastic. Logline doesn't make it sound fantastic. The logline lets us know we got a farm boy, he's our hero. We got a princess in distress, and there's going to be outer space. And, oh, there's this mysterious power called the Force, which enables him somehow to do something cool. But if we've seen the movie, we can adapt it into 21. That's what that red stuff down there is. That's me figuring out what the 21 story moments were, right? And this is important. So let's talk about 2 beats for a story, right? We'll think of them as heartbeats of the story. The 2 beats of a story that we're going to really look at when we're outlining a story are, is the story a procedural story or is it a dramatic story? That's it. We don't care about all the rest of the structure at the moment. We just kind of want to understand, is our story procedural, mostly external to our protagonist? That is, do they have to just basically meet certain moments or certain beats within the story at certain goal points, and thus, in a way, get more enabled to take on the big bad evil guy or the conflict at our resolution of the story? Okay? It's kind of like a James Bond movie, if you think about it, right? James Bond first finds out there's something going to happen, but he can at least intervene and save the world in some fashion, but he's got to go investigate. He learns some stuff. He gets some allies. He gets some cool toys and whatever. He gets a cool car. He gets all the basic resources he needs. And just towards the end, there's one final piece of the puzzle that he needs. Maybe he has to save the girl that is going to give him the secret plans to the Death Star. Who knows? But he's got to get something, and he gets it, and then he succeeds. It's very procedural. Star Wars Episode 4 is very procedural. Everything that happens really is mostly external to our heroes, right? Blow up the Death Star is our resolution. This is where we start outlining our story so we know where we end up at the resolution. When we know where we end up, we have also the counterpoint to it, much like a seesaw. We have the hook. What brings everybody in to our story? Those are our first 2 points in the 7-point plot structure that we're going to look at. If you're interested in finding out more, by the way, about the 7-point plot structure, I'm sure there's quite a few YouTube videos on it. There's a book, I think, called The Star Trek Narrator's Guide to Role-Playing Games. It's out of print. Last time I saw a hardcover copy of it on eBay or something, it was like somewhere around $300. I never read it. Somebody pointed out that what I'm doing is basically what they talk about. Then I went and looked at chapter 4 and fell asleep while starting to read it. But yeah, they were basically talking about how they wrote their television series, which I, having been involved in theatrical arts since the age of 5 and watching television and, well, basically growing up raised by wolves and color television sets, learned the dramatic arts vicariously by watching and studying the stories, and then later going and getting training in it, but that's different for another day. So the 21 kind of red things down here are just basically me mucking about finding the 21 story elements that or story beats that make up Star Wars. So if we divide Star Wars into 3-act play or story, we have in Act 1, 7 beats. In Act 2, 7 beats, and in Act 3, 7 beats. These are the major beats in the story, not beats between actors and characters. We're not writing any dialogue yet. We don't care. So that's 7 beats per act, 21 beats total. The Star Wars score, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-bum. 21/4 format, or 21 beats per 8-bar measure. And it was written after the score, the movie script, so we know it has 21 beats. Now, let's talk about the hook and the resolution. Resolution is where everybody ends up. Death Star blown up by Luke Skywalker. Hey, rebellion saved, etc. Wonderful. The hook, he's a farm boy and wants to leave the planet, discovers that there's a princess in distress, and he has a chance to save her. Now let's look at what plot turn 1 and pinch 1, because those are what we're going to discuss next. Our plot turn 1 is usually where our hero gains some knowledge about themselves that allows them to go on that epic quest. It gives them the hope or the chance that they might be able to do something. For Charlie, wanting to go to the chocolate factory, he gets his golden ticket. For Harry Potter, he finds out he's a wizard and gets invited to wizard school. For Luke Skywalker, he discovers he has the Force within him too. So that's our plot turn 1. But also, at that point, usually our hero sort of backtracks a little bit and goes, I can't, yeah, okay, I got this thing, but I don't know how to use it. And, my family or something is holding me back. And that's where we turn up the heat into pinch 1, right? Where we leave him at a point of no hope for return to his old life. Your new life is the way it is now. And there are lots of ways of doing that depending on the style of story and the heat at the moment for the story, which for Star Wars was awesome because that's, we got a cantina and a chase scene, and it was awesome. Okay, so our pinch 1 follows right on the heels of our hero learning that they're a wizard or something, right? Midpoint, we're going to divide into 2 parts, but the midpoint is our Act 2. Our Act 2 allows us to understand that the hero is going to change. All of our heroes are going to change, make a very big, important change in our story, right? They're going to stop reacting to the stuff that's happening, okay? And they're going to actively take arms against whatever is going on, and they're going to fight. They're going to stand their ground. They're going to proactively bring the fight to whatever is the antagonist, right? They ain't taking this no more. So in that midpoint, that's where we have that change for our characters. And also in the second part of Act 2, we can have a subplot of some kind. Usually this is some sort of romantic conflict or engagement between 2 people, but it doesn't have to be. At pinch 2, we're really turning up the heat and sharpening our jaws. We're taking away almost all the hope we can possibly give our adventurers, right? Just before the resolution. We're taking everything that they thought they had and we're making it either fail or we're taking it away from them or whatever. We're giving them a moment where they have to really think about how they're going to go about succeeding in their goal. And the pressure's really on them. Obi-Wan dies. They're being tracked to the rebel base. They were allowed to escape the Death Star, right? They blew up some stuff to give them a little bit of hope, but as Princess Leia points out, Do you honestly think that something that could destroy the entire planet of Alaron would just let us get away? They're following us to the rebel base to ensure that they destroy us all. We have moments to succeed in our task of blowing up that Death Star. The heat is really on. Luke is bragging about everything that he can do, and he can shoot that little tiny hole in the flaw of the Death Star and blow it up. He's really confident he can do that, but realistically, he doesn't know he can do that. And we get to this point where he's about to go do that, but his wingmen have been destroyed. Darth Vader's on his 6. And Darth Vader knows how to use the Force. Darth Vader blasts Luke Skywalker's X-Wing, damaging his navigation systems, damaging R2. There's no communication with R2 now. Hope is lost. He doesn't know what he's going to do, and he sees his target up ahead of him, but without the navigation systems, he can't guide that shot in properly. Han Solo comes, wings the TIE fighter that Darth Vader's in, says, "Good luck to you, kid. You got this." And then Luke Skywalker hears in his head, in his mind, his mentor, who's dead, Obi-Wan Kenobi. "Use the Force, Luke." Luke, at plot turn 2, just before our resolution, realizes he has the Force within him, realizes he has everything he needs to succeed, and then, boom, we blow up the Death Star. And that's our roller coaster. And if you saw the movie or watched the movie, you were sitting on the same roller coaster I was emotionally. We're going to turn Star Wars 4, A New Hope, into a really kind of interesting starting adventure for new players in a Dungeons & Dragons story environment set in Swords of Sorcery. So we're going to take out starships, we're going to take out lightsabers, and we're going to take out galaxies, right? Because those elements don't exist in Dungeons & Dragons at the moment, so we'll just take them out. They can exist, you can put them there. If you do, you'll probably destroy the willful suspension of disbelief for quite a few people. And we want to make this a story for as broad an audience as we can. Anyway, I hope you've learned something today. And all your die rolls stay blessed. And again, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Till then, see you next time.